Well, good morning, and thank you for inviting me here today to address this audience. My role in the next 30 minutes or so is really to help you take a step back from your day-to-day, whether you're an entrepreneur, an investor, a government person, to really think about, well, what's coming next? How is the world changing? And how do I make sure that what I'm doing is tapping into those opportunities of the future? I also thought it was interesting when we had the show of hands earlier, that the entrepreneurs all put their hands up really high. The investors did this so that no one could see them, bug them afterwards. And the government officials all did this so that they could hide underneath. It kind of tells you something about our behavior. There's also very interesting in terms of countries, who put their hands up really high and who didn't. Again, it was probably about national confidence. So, but my role is really just to try and encourage you to think differently, to think about the world and how it's changing. There are a few people stood up at the side as well. There are some chairs in the room. If you've got a seat next to you that's empty, can you just quickly put your hands up so these guys can see where they can sit down? I always get nervous. I'm from India, so people at the back of the room means you're about to get arrested. So I kind of feel like the Blues Brothers. Okay, so where do we start? Well, if we look at the world today, it's very easy to see all the growth figures, to see what's happening, and to assume that everything's going to be great again. But one thing I would remind you is that no central bank, no global institution like the World Bank or the IMF has ever predicted a recession, even during one. They always say it's not going to happen. And so when we hear the world leaders talking with great confidence about how it's all going to be great and how growth is coming again, don't believe them, because they don't know. We're in an uncertain time. Today, the rich countries of the world have a debt that's more than 100% of their GDP. We heard this morning that Tokyo has gone back into recession. We know partly why that is. We know that derivatives, these complex contracts that the banks created, subprime was one example of that, but there are many others. The global economy is worth $70 trillion. The experts tell us that when you design an economy, derivatives contracts should be no more than 10% of your economy. So does anyone want to guess at what the estimated value is of derivatives contracts around the world? Remember, the global economy is 70 trillion. No more than 10% should be in derivatives. 600, pretty close. $700 trillion. Which means that the banks have become phenomenally successful. They've taken that model that said it should only be 10%, and instead we're now 1,000%. Which is why when the leaders of the G20 get together to try and make decisions, the only two decisions they make are, let's not decide anything, and yes, let's have salmon or chicken for lunch. Because they don't know how to deal with this. We are in uncharted territory. There is no blueprint for how you deal with this. So what we know is that just simply following government instructions or following the market no longer works. Even if you're in a successful, fast-growing economy, you cannot simply do what everyone else is doing. You cannot simply follow the herd, because very quickly you'll get overcapacity and then you'll get problems. That is history every time. So what we have to do now is really start to think. And start to think, how do we succeed in this environment? It's quite liberating to know that there are these problems, to know that there could be more downturns. Because that means you have to think for yourselves. You have to start to think about, how do I create opportunities? Am I going for the big growth markets that are coming? Am I going for the basic necessities that we know that there's always going to be a need for, whether it's food, housing, education, infrastructure? Or am I focusing on the growth economies just around this region because they've got a long way to go? Or am I going for the big billion-plus economies of China and India, where a lot of other people have tried, some have succeeded, many have failed? You're having to think really hard now. And it's not about your technology. How many of you here are in technology businesses in one way or another? All right. How many of you here are in customer-oriented businesses? That's quite scary that most of the room, or 2/3 of the room, put their hands up, 1/3 didn't. I don't know a business today that succeeds that isn't customer-orientated. And the real challenge is not about how good your technology is. It is about, how do you get people talking about your business? How do you get customer insight? How do you get customers to want your product? How do you get people talking about you? That's the world we're moving into. And we also know that the change is happening quite rapidly, whether it's power shift, whether it's resources, whether it's energy prices. It's just started. The rules of the game are changing. The biggest change that's happening, though, is that our attention span has been taken from us. It has been sucked away. We used to send reports, then we wrote memos, then we sent emails, then we sent SMS messages or text messages. Now we're down to 140 characters, Twitter postings. Unless you have teenage children, in which case they've reduced the communications to a single character grunt. Means yes, no, or I'm happy or not. I watch my 16-year-old daughter, and she is my perfect model for the world I'm trying to communicate with. Her operating system is totally different. She's watching TV, she's looking at a magazine, she's got her iPod in, she's listening to music, she has her BlackBerry, she's sending text messages and BBM messages on her BlackBerry. She doesn't talk on her phone because only old people use the phone for that. And she's on her laptop. And I say to her, Hannah, what are you doing? And remember, she's 16, so therefore genetically I must be wrong. She says, homework. And instead of criticizing or saying that's wrong, I know that her results at school are way better than I ever did. So I have to understand her operating system. I have to understand where she's coming from. It doesn't matter how good my idea is. It doesn't matter how good my insight is. If I do not know how my customer, in this case my daughter, is listening, it makes no difference. I could have the best proposition in the world, but if I don't start from where she's listening, if I don't start from my customer, everything is wasted. And I think one of the most fantastic things that CEED has done, and I'm not saying this simply because you've asked me to be here, is to understand the customer in each market you're working in, understand the context they're operating in, and understand how you develop entrepreneurs in each context. There is no point giving you a model that says, this is how it works in Boston, or this is how it works in Singapore, or this is how it works in London. You have to have a model that says, how do you become entrepreneurial in Ljubljana, or in Kosovo, or in Serbia? You have to start from there. And I think one of the great things to recognize is, yes, we are in an exciting time. There is huge growth. If you look at some of the countries, this is from the Economist Intelligence Unit, they didn't list all the countries in CEED, but one of the encouraging things is, yes, there's real growth in these markets. And that's great, because that tells you that when there's growth, there's vibrancy, things are happening. People are buying things as businesses, as consumers, and it creates all sorts of opportunities. And you don't have to look too hard to find them, because in a growth market, everything is happening. We also know that, one of the things we know is that actually developing entrepreneurial culture, encouraging innovation, really does have global results. So you look at Slovenia, punching well above its weight in terms of its positioning globally. It's a 2 million person country, relatively low GDP out of the 211 countries, but actually playing much higher than that. And that's a real testimony to the quality of the infrastructure that's been built here to encourage business, to encourage entrepreneurship. So we know the prize is an attractive one if we get it right. We also know that, that a lot of that is down to innovation. Again, Slovenia punching well above its weight because of its innovation ranking, and we see that the opportunity is there for the others to look at that model and say, what can we learn from it? How do we adopt it locally? So, and we also know that, interestingly enough, we may think, we're not as innovative as other countries. A lot of the countries in the room are actually well ranked compared to those that you might consider to be bigger economies or more successful economies. So actually, there's nothing naturally that is preventing our economies from being successful. The challenge is how you take that innovation and turn it into real businesses that have real markets and real viability. One of the big challenges is to make sure that it's actually easy for people to get on and do business. And again, I think some of the countries in the region are doing very, very well and actually accelerating their relaxing of sort of regulations or making it simpler for people to do business. And that, again, is very important. And when we did our research on this, we found some really good examples of businesses that we thought had created a viable opportunity. Now, we're going to talk a bit about technology. Zemanta, very good local business here. It's a tool that's for creating web content, blog content, but the great thing is it's monitoring the internet as you're typing. So if I'm writing an article about mining opportunities in Southern Africa, it's looking for other articles on that and telling me about them instantly. So I can incorporate that content into my blog article. Very smart piece of technology being developed locally. Red Orbit, a very clever business in this region in Slovenia that focuses on helping people really develop their presence online, improving their performance in the search rankings, improving how they do online PR, but really providing basic tools to people as the economy becomes more web-focused. And then you've seen the tourism sector really become quite a beacon in terms of attracting innovation and investment. You've got the local tourism bank, which is there specifically to bring ideas and investors together in a very efficient way. You've got Term Snovik, which is one of the first eco-certified resorts in Europe. Similarly, Hotel Primus, one of the most energy-efficient resorts in Europe. And Mayor Adrenaline Park, which has taken this basic natural park and built a beautiful theme park within it, which is all natural activities designed to attract international tourists. So you've got some very good examples just here in Slovenia. Then we found Mobexpert, bigger than the average business in the room, I expect, but a good example of what you can achieve just by focusing on basic necessity. These guys spotted that, you know, in Romania, people wanted really high quality modern office furniture. They wanted stuff that really reflected their aspirations. Back in 1993, they opened. They now have stores in Romania, Bulgaria. They're just opening up in Serbia. They now have 4 factories. They're turning over about 170 million euros a year. They've gone there since 1993, and you know the environment they've done that in. These guys are investing 2 million euros a year in innovation. So what we can see is that there's the prize is phenomenal, and it's achievable by everyone in this room who is an entrepreneur. One I really like is this world-class X-ray machine that's just won an award in Serbia for innovation. It's ranked as one of the best quality innovations in the Serbian market, but also in the healthcare market globally. Their customers aren't just in this region, they're global. So the opportunity for them is a truly global one. And I think we have to really sort of take account of just what we mean by a global opportunity. If we look at where the world was at the beginning of this year, the end of last year, what we see is 60% of the world is in Asia. In the last 30 years, China's taken more than 450 million people out of poverty. India's taken about 150 million out of poverty. That is being replicated across the developing world. They're building the business infrastructure, the social infrastructure, the physical infrastructure to drive growth. This is one of the reasons why people are saying that we're going to see this shift from west to east, already seeing it, simply because of population. That kind of population becoming economically active drives a huge amount of growth and opportunity. And it does create both opportunity for you, but also competition. But what's really interesting is what happens next. What we see is that Asia Pacific will grow by more than the whole of Europe and America combined. So we're adding the equivalent of those 2 continents, with the kind of wealth levels we're talking about. A phenomenal shift. And that means, you know, keeping your eyes on the opportunity. We also know that we're aging. As a society, across the developed world, what we know is that something like 65% to 75% of the wealth is held by people aged over 65. They are a poorly served group in every market. Of that, something like 3/4 of that, the wealth is in the hands of women. And I noticed that we're a predominantly male audience. So for those of you who are entrepreneurs who are just starting out and you're looking for an insurance policy as well as your business, start dating widows. We also know that our life expectancy is going up, on average, by 44 days every year. If you're under 50 now and you're from a developed economy, there's a 90% chance you'll live to 100. So that group has a long time to go to spend money. There's also research gone on something called the nematode worm. The nematode worm has a similar genetic structure to humans, so they do a lot of experiments on the worm that they can't do on humans. And one of the things they look at are proteins. Proteins are the building blocks of our genes. They found a protein in the worm that controls aging. When you stop that protein functioning, it extends the life of the worm by 3 to 5 times. They think they found the same protein in humans. How do you motivate a 190-year-old salesperson? What do you buy your partner for their 200th birthday? And think about marriage.